The final chord hung in the air, then flattened against the damp concrete walls. Jake let the vibration fade, looking out at the 6 people huddled in the back. They did not look up from their half-empty glasses. The room was cold, smelling of stale beer and stagnant air. He stood for a moment, waiting for a reaction that never came. The manager crossed the floor, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the hollow space. He shoved a crumpled $20 bill into Jake's hand and pointed toward the rear exit without a word. Jake didn't argue. He packed his guitar, the latch clicking with a sharp, lonely snap. Outside, the night air bit at his skin. He shoved his amp into the back of the rusted van, the metal frame scraping harshly against the floorboards. He climbed into the driver's seat, the silence of the cabin pressing against his chest. He turned the key. The engine sputtered, groaned, and finally caught, vibrating through the steering wheel. He pulled onto the highway, the dark road stretching ahead, empty and indifferent. The highway lights blurred into long, rhythmic streaks. In the silence of the van, the voices returned. His parents' Sunday dinner lectures about desk jobs and stability echoed in his mind. His friends, whose phone calls had stopped months ago, seemed to mock his persistence from the periphery of his thoughts. He pulled the van onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. The silence was absolute. He reached into the glove box, fingers brushing against a worn, dog-eared book. He opened it to a page marked by years of handling. The text was blunt. The majority of people are ready to give up at the first sign of opposition. Jake stared at the words until they blurred. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, his breath hitching in his chest. He slammed his palm against the hard plastic of the dashboard, a sharp, sudden crack that silenced the ghosts in his head. He reached into the passenger seat, grabbed a notepad, and pressed the pen into the paper with enough force to tear the sheet. In bold, jagged letters, he wrote, "I will build a life doing what I love." He looked at the ink, then back at the dark road. The sun hit the window, but Jake did not look at his phone. There were no notifications to check, no likes to chase, and no comments to read. He ignored the screen entirely, letting it gather dust on the nightstand. He pulled the metronome from its box and set the timer for 4 hours. The first hour was easy. The second hour felt like a chore. By the third, the repetition turned into a dull, throbbing ache in his hands. He pushed through. He played the same scales, up and down, over and over, until the steel strings bit into his skin. He did not stop when the skin broke. He did not stop when the first drop of blood smeared onto the fretboard, leaving a dark, tacky residue against the wood. He played until the rhythm was etched into his pulse, until the notes became a physical extension of his own reach. When the timer finally buzzed, he slumped back, his fingers raw and pulsing. He looked at the blood-stained strings, wiped his hands on his pants, and stood up to reset the clock. This was not a hobby. This was a war of attrition against his own limitations. He sat back down, took a breath, and started again. The calendar pages turned, but the crowds did not grow. He played for 4 people, then 2, then 0. The basement bars were always the same. Damp air, sticky floors, and the hum of a refrigerator that was louder than his music. Each night, he loaded his gear back into the van with the same mechanical precision. He began to track his life in guitar strings instead of paychecks. Rent money went to new sets of steel. Grocery money went to gas. He lived on dry bread and stale coffee, his kitchen table buried under sheet music and half-finished compositions. The silence of the empty rooms became his most consistent audience. He stood on small makeshift stages, checked the empty chairs, and played every note with the same intensity he would have used for a stadium. He did not look for applause. He looked for the perfection of the next chord. When the landlord knocked, he turned the music up to drown out the demand for rent. When the bank balance hit 0, he sold his spare furniture to buy more time. It was a decade of invisibility. He was a ghost in the city, defined only by the sound of his own instrument echoing against concrete walls that refused to listen. The rehearsal halls were drafty, cavernous spaces where his breath hitched in the stagnant air. He spent his weekends there, hunched over his guitar while the city outside moved on without him. The heating never worked. He played until his knuckles were stiff and pale, his breath visible in the dim light. He would drop his head against the neck of the guitar, eyes closed, listening to the resonance bounce off the bare, peeling walls. Every hour spent in that isolation stripped away a layer of his ego. He stopped caring about the lack of recognition. He stopped checking the door to see if anyone had wandered in. The rhythm became his only companion, a steady, relentless pulse that dictated his waking hours. He learned to find beauty in the dissonance of his own mistakes. He learned to trust the calluses on his fingers more than the opinions of his peers. By the end of the 8th year, the solitude was no longer a burden. It was a fortress. He existed in the space between notes, calm and detached from the world that had forgotten him. He was not waiting for an audience anymore. He was busy becoming someone who deserved one. Every chord he struck was a brick in a foundation that no failure could ever dismantle. One Tuesday, the air in the room felt different. He set the microphone, checked the levels, and played the song he had practiced for 1,000 hours. The recording captured every nuance, every vibration, and every flaw he had spent years refining. He uploaded the file, closed the laptop, and went to bed, fully expecting the digital void to swallow it whole. He slept without dreams. He woke up to the sound of a notification pinging, then another, then a chorus of them. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. The number blinked back at him. 10,000 views. He refreshed the page. It climbed. By the time he reached the kitchen, it hit 50,000. The numbers were moving faster than he could track. By Friday, the count breached 1 million. The solitude that had defined his existence for a decade was suddenly shattered by the weight of 1 million eyes. His phone, which had stayed silent for years, began to vibrate against the table with a persistent, frantic rhythm. The era of playing for ghosts had ended in the span of a single night. He stared at the screen, the blue light harsh against his eyes, realizing that the world had finally caught up to the sound he had been building in the dark. The phone did not stop. Agents, labels, and managers blurred into a single, insistent voice on the other end of the line, promising the world. He moved through the transition with the same mechanical focus he had used for his scales. One week, he was packing his amp into the rusted van in total silence. The next, he was stepping off a plane into a whirlwind of flashes and schedules. The world had expanded from the dimensions of his room to the vast, hollow echo of international venues. Then came the night. He stood in the tunnel beneath the arena, the air thick with the smell of ozone and anticipation. He walked toward the light, the concrete floor vibrating under his boots. As he rounded the corner, the sound hit him a physical impact that rattled his chest. 50,000 voices surged, a tidal wave of noise that swallowed the arena whole. He moved to the center of the stage, the steel grating clicking beneath his feet. The lights were blinding, a wall of white that erased everything beyond the front row. He reached for his guitar, felt the familiar weight of the neck, and for a heartbeat, he looked back toward the dark. Silent space behind the stage. The roar was deafening, but he was grounded, waiting for the signal to begin. The roar of the crowd dipped into a low hum as the stage lights shifted. A young guitarist, eyes wide with ambition, hurried toward the center of the stage. He shouted over the fading echo of the last song, his face tight with expectation. "How do I get here? What is the secret?" Jake did not look at the crowd. He stepped forward, the steel grating clicking under his boots, and leaned in until their foreheads were inches apart. He lowered his voice, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. "You do not start here," Jake said. "You start in the empty rooms." The young man froze, the question still hovering on his lips. Jake gestured toward the vast, dark void behind the stage rigging. "When the room is empty, do you play? When the crowd is silent, do you practice? When your bank account hits 0, do you continue?" The young man had no answer. He stood motionless, his hands gripping his instrument as if the weight of the truth were suddenly pulling him toward the floor. Jake watched him, seeing the same desperate hunger he had carried for a decade. The arena lights flared, blinding and white, but they did not illuminate the answer. The truth was not in the stage. It was in the silence he had left behind. The young man drifted back into the shadows of the stage, his head bowed. Jake stood alone under the white intensity of the spotlight. The roar of the crowd was still there, a constant, vibrating frequency against his skin, but it felt distant now. He looked out into the cavernous dark. He saw the faces in the front row, but they were just silhouettes against the glare. He realized then that the arena was not the summit. It was merely a result. The real victory had already been claimed years ago, in the drafty halls and the quiet, Lonely hours where the only applause was the metronome's click. He felt the weight of his guitar, not as a tool for fame, but as a testament to the 10,000 hours of invisible labor. The pressure he had felt to prove himself to the world evaporated. He did not need the validation of the 50,000 voices. He had already won the moment he decided to keep playing for no one. He took a breath, the air thin and dry. The arena was a stage, but his life was the practice. He stood in the center of the light, grounded by a decade of silence, and felt a profound, steady clarity take hold. The massive arena faded into a blur of light and sound. Jake reached down, his fingers finding the familiar, weathered steel of the strings. He closed his eyes, shutting out the thousands of faces, the flashing screens, and the deafening roar of the night. He felt the cold metal against his calloused skin, a sensation that transported him back to the damp, concrete-walled basement of his youth. He positioned his hand, fingers arching over the fretboard with the same precision he had used when he played for only 2 people. The world narrowed down to the vibrating tension of the guitar. He drew a deep, steady breath, feeling the weight of the last 10 years settle into his bones. He did not play for the arena. He played for the silence. He struck the chord. It was raw, resonant, and unmistakably familiar, a direct echo of the very first note he had ever played in that empty room years ago. The sound cut through the chaos of the concert, sharp and pure. He held the resonance as it decayed, a bridge between who he was and who he had become. The victory was not in the noise. It was in the music.